The Korean artist Na Hye-seok was a pioneer in many ways. She was the first Korean woman formally to study art, and the first to study at an art school in Japan. She was one of the first Korean artists to study art in Europe, and the first Korean woman to do so, the first female artist in Korea to have a solo exhibition of her work, and the first Korean woman who could claim to practice as a professional artist. For the art historian Dr. Kim Hong-hee, she is a pioneering artist who more or less single-handedly ushered in the dawn of women's art in Korea. Na Hye-seok was also a writer, a journalist, and a poet. She was, above all, a pioneering feminist and campaigner for women's rights in Korea, and one of the first women in East Asia to bring the ideas of contemporary European and North American feminism to her home country, and use them to question Confucian patriarchal tradition in which women's roles were strictly defined. In that tradition, a woman was subject to the three obediences, to father, to husband, and to son, and was expected to behave in accordance with the ideal of wise mother and good wife. Na challenged this characterization of women's place in modern society. In 1914, when she was 18 years old and studying painting in Tokyo, she wrote this for a Korean journal published in Japan.
Then how can we become real women? It goes without saying that we have to acquire knowledge and skills. We need to develop our abilities to take care of worldly matters with common sense, no matter what befalls us. We need to become women who possess a clear sense of purpose and a consciousness to live up to their full individual potentials. We should become pioneers of our age in terms of understanding modern philosophies, knowledge and character. We ought to be ideal women ourselves, who are true and powerful sources of a mysterious inner light that brightens interpersonal relationships.
Na Hye-seok's life encompassed a period of great change in Korean history. She was born in 1896 in Suwon in central western Korea, about 20 kilometers south of what is now the South Korean capital, Seoul, marked here on this English-language map. This was the very end of the era of the Joseon dynasty, which had ruled Korea for 5 centuries. For much of the 19th century, Joseon Korea, officially a Chinese tributary state, had tried to keep itself isolated from foreign influences. But Korea had become more and more subject to pressure from other states, above all Japan, and was increasingly caught up in the geopolitical rivalries of China, Japan, and Russia, as well as Western powers. Korea was forced under unequal treaties to open up to the outside world, while internally the country suffered from economic backwardness, severe social tension and unrest, and chronic political instability. In the year after Na Hye-seok's birth, 1897, Joseon Korea declared itself an empire, signaling its independence of both Chinese and Japanese domination. This is Gojong, the King of Korea, who became Emperor of Korea in 1897, and thus wears a robe of imperial yellow, a color formerly reserved to the Chinese emperor alone. But despite a continuing program of reform and modernization, Korea could do little to resist Japan's aggression and expansionism. A Japanese protectorate was imposed on Korea in 1905, and the country was formally annexed as a Japanese colony in 1910, a status which ended only with Japan's military defeat in 1945. 3 years later, in 1948, Na Hye-seok died at the age of 52. Almost all her adult life was thus spent in a Korea subjected to Japanese rule. Na Hye-seok did not accept Japanese domination of her country and at times actively resisted it, but her life was inevitably shaped by it. As a promising student from a well-connected and reasonably prosperous family, her father was a civil servant who supported her artistic ambitions. She won the privilege of being able to study in Japan, where her brother was already a student. She studied at the private Women's School of Fine Arts, which had opened in 1901. The school offered tuition in both Eastern and Western painting, and Na Hye-seok studied the latter. Her interest was always in oil painting, in the Western tradition. It was while a student in Tokyo that Na Hye-seok became an active feminist. The feminist movement was much more developed in Japan than it was in contemporary Korea. She began to write for journals connected with the women's movement, an activity she continued after returning to Korea. In the 1920s, she played a leading role in the expansion of print, journalism, and visual culture associated with the Korean New Woman movement, particularly in connection with the journal Sin Yo-ja. The name literally means New Woman, founded in 1920. She also developed her sense of Korean nationhood while in Japan, and in March 1919 took part in a nationwide series of protests against Japanese rule. This uprising was violently repressed by the Japanese authorities, with many people killed and injured and many imprisoned. Among the latter was Na Hye-seok. Her family hired a young lawyer, Kim Woo-young, to obtain her release. He succeeded. The two became close, and in 1920 they were married. In 1927 the couple went on an international trip, spending 3 years in Europe, where Na studied both art and contemporary feminist ideas. It was while Na Hye-seok was in Paris that the event happened which would shape the remainder of her life. She had an affair with another man, Korean nationalist campaigner Choi Rin. As a result, her husband divorced her on the grounds of infidelity in 1931. She lost contact with her children, and other members of her family rejected her. Na Hye-seok continued to paint and exhibit, and to write and publish, but the public revelation of infidelity and the divorce did great damage to her reputation. Perhaps even more damaging was her apparent lack of shame or remorse. She wrote articles praising sexual freedom for women, attacking the hypocrisy of a society that applied different standards of sexual morality to men and women, defending divorce, and questioning the value of marriage as a social institution. "Chastity is neither morality nor law," she wrote in 1930, arguing that the liberation of women begins with our liberation from the requirements of chastity. These were not new concerns for her. She had been exploring them in her writings since her teenage years. To give 2 examples from early in her career, her 1918 short story, Kyung-hui, and her poem, A Doll's House, published in connection with the first translation of Ibsen's play to appear in Korea in 1921. However, her opportunities to publish and to exhibit her paintings declined during the 1930s because of the undermining of her public reputation. Her last public exhibition of paintings in Seoul in 1935 received hostile coverage in the press and was a failure.
I lost trust in everyone. I had to deal with public shame and ridicule. My parents and relatives abandoned me, and good friends turned their backs on me. I'm left wandering in the wilderness, lost in the darkness, staring at the emptiness. Am I walking in the darkness with a brush and palette in my trembling hands, seeking one last beam of light?
She continued to paint, to write, and, in her own words, to seek the light, but she felt increasingly outcast and isolated. Her health also declined. She died alone and destitute in a charity hospital in Seoul in 1948. It is sometimes said that Na Hye-seok's painting, in comparison to her writing, is not very feminist. Leaving aside the question of what feminist art might have looked like in colonial Korea, and the fact that self-identifying and self-conscious feminist art still remained a relative rarity, even in Europe or North America at this time, the important point is that, however apparently traditional her painting may have been, she was being feminist simply by doing it, and just by existing as works of art created by a woman to express her own individuality and artistic personality, her works were feminist. Her use of European post-impressionist and Fauvist-influenced styles in depicting Korean subjects was itself a radical choice. Na Hye-seok made the conscious decision to interpret Korean landscapes and portraits in a manner informed by the styles of contemporary Europe, which she had studied when in Paris in the 1920s. Such experimentation became more common in Korea in the 1930s, but even then it was limited in scale, and was better received in Japan than it was in Korea, where there were few exhibition opportunities. Na Hye-seok was a pioneer in pursuing this path in the 1920s. The fact that she was a woman makes her radicalism even more significant. Not until the Fauvist-influenced paintings of Pak Nam-soon achieved success in the 1930s did another Korean female artist achieve a similar prominence in her home country. Some of her landscapes have a melancholy air, and her palette is typically subdued, but she also brought out the vibrancy of Parisian street scenes and the strong forms and colours of traditional Korean architecture. She sought to depict the ordinary life of the people of the Korean countryside, with a particular concern for the burden of daily work carried by women. The simplified forms and use of strong outlines and colours reveal the European post-impressionist influences that Na Hye-seok brought to Korean art. Even in her landscapes, Na sought to give female figures dignity and a sense of independence and freedom. In this view of Seoho Lake near her birthplace of Suwon, two women are placed within the landscape, interacting with each other and harmonizing with the artificial and the natural aspects of the setting, but also standing out in their traditional white Korean clothing, each in a different posture to give individuality, each surrounded by space to suggest independence and freedom of action. Implications of freedom are also present in her landscapes, with their vigorous brushwork, strong colours, and sense of movement, even when figures are absent. The flowers in peonies at Hwareonjong, vibrant in colour, and the wind-blown trees seem to be delighting in the freedom of nature itself, freedom that is available to human beings too, if they choose to accept it. It is in her figurative work that Na is at her most radical, and arguably most feminist. This is a late work, The Dancer, from 1940. It shows two women dressed in very fashionable clothes, and with the characteristic short haircuts of the modern girls of late colonial Korea. With their heavily made up and impassive faces and their rigid poses, and their lack of individuality, they are reminiscent of mannequins from the windows of the new department stores that were such a feature of contemporary Seoul. There is an undercurrent of criticism in this painting, as if Na is arguing that it is an error for women to exchange one sort of constrained social role for another, oppressive traditionalism for empty consumerism. Na's self-portrait from 1928 is perhaps her single most important work. She presents herself in a self-consciously modernistic Western style, as an assemblage of angular forms within a flattened picture plane, evoking the contemporary European experiments in portraiture she would have seen in Paris. Her gaze is reflective, but at the same time penetrating, conveying a powerful sense of intellectual engagement, reinforced by the solemnity of her expression and the formalized immobility of her pose. Her dress and hairstyle proclaim her a serious female intellectual, a new woman who exists within, interacts with, and critiques society on her own terms. This self-portrait was a pioneering and unique work in the late 1920s. 10 years later, the situation for Korean artists had been transformed. Exhibition opportunities had increased. There was a wider market of buyers interested in contemporary as well as antique Korean art. There was more experimentation with new approaches and influences from abroad. Na Hye-seok's career had been undermined and cut short, but she had, nevertheless, laid the foundations for many of these developments. Her tragedy was that she did not live to benefit from them, and take full part in them herself.